Szeretettel köszöntök mindenkit. That is to say, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and special greetings to the ambassadors who are the speakers here today, but also the ambassadors in the audience, representatives of embassies, members of the press, as well as activists who have joined us here today. My name is Craig Johnson, and I've been given the honor to essentially support this event as the anchor, or rather the host.
Hölgyeim és uraim, mindenkit szeretettel köszöntök ezen a mai estén, jó estét kívánok! Tulajdonképpen most magyarul mondtam el a köszöntőmet. Szeretnék mindenkit tehát üdvözölni, a megjelenteket, nagykövet urakat, excellenciás urakat, egyéb magas beosztású vendégeinket, és a sajtó képviselőit is. A nevem Craig Johnson, az enyém, és én kaptam azt a megtisztelő feladatot, hogy ma ennek a programnak a házigazdája lehessek.
I would also like to spare a moment to acknowledge and introduce you to Esther Elek, who will be helping us with translation services today.
Egyben szeretném bemutatni a tolmácsunkat is, vagyis engem elkezdtem.
4 or 5 years since the last time I was here.
Szeretettel köszöntöm Önöket a UNICEF központban, amely egyben illetve intézetben, amely egyben a török kulturális központ is. Bár nem először járok itt, de erről még ezt fogok már szólni.
I was telling the organizing committee there was really a time about 4 or 5 years ago when it was a very active year, and I used to frequent here almost weekly, monthly. There were a lot of events that were organized by the Turkish students that would educate us on Turkish customs and Turkish culture.
4-5 évvel ezelőtt nagyon élénk volt itt a mozgalmas volt az élet. Én magam is nagyon sokszor megfordultam, érdekes programokon vehettem részt, amikor is a török diákok a török kultúráról és török érdekességekről beszéltek.
So perhaps it's the first time for many of you here today, but from my side I have a lot of good memories that I experienced in this building. Each time I came, I knew there would be good company, good discussions, but also great baklava as well. So if all of you promise to be a bit well behaved, then we can sort of see what we can organize during the break in the cafeteria.
Tehát, ahogy mondtam, többször megfordultam itt ebben az épületben, és most nagy örömnek szolgál, hogy újból itt lehetek, és érdekes beszélgetéseket, előadásokat fogunk hallani, hallgatni. Ez a hely azonban nem csak az érdekes beszélgetések színhelye, hanem például remek baklavát is lehet kapni, ha mindenki jól viselkedik, akkor meglátjuk, hogy a szünetben lehet ezügyben valami segítséget nyújtani.
Today, however, the world is very different to how it was 4 or 5 years ago. The state of the world is not looking good. And as we sit here and get to enjoy the good company and good discussions, the freedoms and the basic human rights, or even going to bed knowing that we can wake up knowing that there's guaranteed access to food and water, the truth of the matter is, many of us take this for granted today, until it is taken away.
Ma ugyanakkor a világ teljesen más, mint ahogy 4-5 évvel ezelőtt volt, és azért gyűjtünk itt ma össze egy olyan korszakban, egy olyan pillanatban, amikor a világ egyáltalán nem néz ki jól. Ahogy most épp itt ülünk, és jó társaságban vagyunk, és azt a szabadságot élvezzük, amely itt mindannyiunkat érint, és képesek vagyunk egyébként a világban szabadon mozogni, élvezzük mindazt, amit nyújt az élet számunkra. Ezek között nagyon fontosként emelem ki a vizet és az élelmiszer. Olyan dolgok ezek, amelyek nagyon sok embernek nem állnak rendelkezésére a mai napon.
There have been serious failures of diplomacy. And as a result, there are serious tragedies that are actually happening in the world today. Not just in Ukraine, but more specifically in Palestine and in Gaza, where we are witnessing total destruction. A violation of basic human rights and a humanitarian crisis that, quite frankly, could have been avoided.
A diplomácia súlyos hibákat követett el, és ennek eredményeképpen súlyos tragédiák történnek szerte a világban. Nem csupán Ukrajnában, de Palesztinában és Gázában is, ahol pillanatnyilag totális rombolást tapasztalunk, az emberi jogok totális megsértését, és olyan humanitárius krízist, amelyet el lehetett volna kerülni.
So this is why we have gathered here today. We're here to put a very bright spotlight on some of the core issues surrounding the Palestine-Israel conflict, and to make sense of the facts and to expose the hypocrisies that we see today. We're going to talk about Gaza and the response of the international community with reference to the ICJ ruling.
Ez az, amiért ma itt összegyűltünk. Azért vagyunk itt, hogy fényt derítsünk, illetve rávilágítsunk azokra a súlyos problémákra, amelyek a palesztin-izrael konfliktust fémjelzik, és ezeket a tényeket valahogyan értelmezzük. Beszélünk majd Gázáról és a nemzetközi közösség a konfliktusra adott válaszairól, különös hivatkozással a legutóbbi ICJ rendeletre, illetve határozatra.
You would have all received the program, so I imagine you have an idea of what to expect tonight. I shall elaborate on the introductions of each of the speakers, but for now I would like to acknowledge them in order that they appear in the program.
Valószínűleg valamennyien megkapták a részletes programot. A bevezetésemben minden előadóról fogok pár szót mondani, és a továbbiakban, amikor a program zajlik, még részleteket is hozzáteszek. Most egyelőre szeretném tehát bemutatni a ülés sorrendben azokat, akik ma megszólalnak.
First speaker would be Ambassador of the State of Palestine to Hungary, His Excellency Ambassador Dr. Fedi al-Husseini. Thank you for joining.
Elsőként Dr. Fadi al-Husseini, excellenciás nagykövet urat szeretném bemutatni, a palesztin állam nagykövetét Magyarországra.
Ambassador of the Republic of South Africa to Hungary, His Excellency Mr. Gangumzi Tsengiwe.
Excellenciás nagykövet urat, Gangumzi Tsengivét, a Dél-Afrikai Köztársaság nagykövetét.
An Ambassador of the Republic of Turkey to Hungary, Her Excellency Ms. Gulshan Karanas Ekshigulu.
Azután pedig bemutatnám excellenciás hölgyet, Gülsen Karanis asszonyt, a Török Köztársaság magyarországi nagykövetét.
Thank you all once again for being here tonight. After all the speakers have concluded their remarks, there will be a moment to have open questions from the audience, depending how fast we get through the program. And thereafter we invite you to the cafeteria for some light drinks and snacks. And this will be followed by a film screening titled Five Broken Cameras.
Nagyon szépen köszönöm még egyszer, hogy itt vannak ma este velünk, és miután valamennyi előadó elmondta a beszédét, lesz lehetőség kérdéseket feltenni, illetve azokra a válaszokat meg fogják kapni. Ezt követően pedig szeretnék meghívni őket a kávézóba, néhány italra és valami finomságra, majd ezt követőleg a program tovább folytatódik a filmvetítéssel, melynek a címe 5 összetört kamera.
Right, so without further ado, ladies and gentlemen and distinguished guests, it is with great honor that I introduce you to our first speaker, the Ambassador of the State of Palestine to Hungary, His Excellency Ambassador Dr. Fedi al-Husseini. Born in the historic city of Gaza, his journey from the occupied streets of his childhood to the world of international diplomacy is a testament to his resilience and an unwavering commitment to peace and justice. His academic achievements span continents, and his insights bring personal perspectives to someone who has lived through the realities of a military occupation in Gaza. Today, he will share his perspectives in an address titled The War on Gaza, Implications and Recent Developments. Please join me in welcoming Ambassador Dr. Fedi al-Husseini.
Még mielőtt a kollégám beszédére sorra kerülnem, további szószaporítás nélkül és helyett, hölgyeim és uraim, tisztelt vendégek, szeretném önöknek bemutatni első előadónkat, a Palesztin Köztársaság nagykövetét, excellenciás dr. Fadi el-Husseini urat, aki a történelmi Gáza városában született, és a gyermekkorának az elfoglalt utcáiról az útja a nemzetközi diplomáciába vezetett, és ez önmagában is jelzése annak a kitartásnak és rendíthetetlen elkötelezettségnek, melyet érez a béke és az igazság iránt. Akadémiai, illetve tanulmányi eredményei kontinenseken keresztül ívelnek, és ezzel kapcsolatos tudása személyes perspektívákat jelent olyas valakinek, aki az okkupáció és a konfliktus realitásait élt, illetve azok alatt élt. Ma pedig megismerhetjük az ő előadásában egy olyan körülményt, illetve egy olyan történetet, melynek címe a gázai háború, annak implikációi és a legutóbbi fejlemények.
Thank you, Esther. Thank you, Greg. Allow me at the outset to express my gratitude to His Excellency, Brother Ambassador of the Republic of South Africa, a dear brother whose country stands is worthy of appreciation and respect. I would like also to extend my thanks to Her Excellency, Ambassador of the Republic of Turkey, my valued sister and friend, acknowledging the commendable position of the leadership and the people of Turkey amidst this situation. I would like also to thank Mr. Mustafa, the director of Yunus Emre Institute, for hosting this event. Thank you. Also, I would like to welcome all the distinguished guests, the vibrant Palestinian community, and of course my thanks go to my dedicated team who has been working under immense pressure for the past 153 days. I would like to start my brief speech by a short story about Palestine, which was described once as a land without a people, or a people without a land. That's how it was described. Perhaps this phrase serves as a potential starting point to understand the mentality, the mindset of those engaged in the acts of ethnic cleansing in Palestine, in Gaza, West Bank, and Jerusalem. Unfortunately, many of the supporters of this aggression do think that Palestine, the Palestinians, never existed before 1948. So before taking you into a short journey to the Holy Land, to Palestine, before 1948, I would like to invite you to pay attention to the words uttered from the mouth of the fourth Israeli Prime Minister, famous Golda Meir, talking about the Palestinians. It's not right. Okay. So she speaks in Hebrew, and the translation here in Hungarian, and I will say what she says in English. She's basically saying,
בארץ לפני מלחמת השחרור, אנחנו כולנו פלסטינאים. עובדה, יש לי הפספורט הישן. מ-21 עד 48 הייתי פלסטינאית.
She's basically saying, am I essentially denying this issue, which is the existence of Palestinians? I believe that all the people sitting here were Palestinians before 1948. We are all Palestinians. In fact, yes, I carry my old passport. From 1921 until 1948, I was a citizen, a Palestinian. The second video, and it's in a later interview, Golda Meir reiterates her identity. And she speaks English here.
I'm a Palestinian. From 21 until 48, I carried a Palestinian passport. There was no such thing in this area as Jews and Arabs and Palestinians. There were Jews and Arabs.
So Golda Meir, it's worth telling you that she was born in Kiev. And she was referring to a historical period where people in Palestine, Jews, Christians, Muslims, used to live together in peace, harmony, coexistence, and tolerance together as Palestinians. Now, another glimpse into the past reveals a visa application from Shimon Peres, the 8th Prime Minister of Israel, and later the President of Israel, trying to seek entry to Palestine. This is his visa application. Now, let's embark on a brief journey to the Holy Land, to Palestine before 1948. And remember, this land was described as a land without a people. So this is the Palestinian Orchestra in 1930s performing some songs about Orange, a glimpse into that era in Palestine. Please go.
ذو عصي ضيافة كوباية كل ساعتين كوباية تطلب كوبايتين البرتقال برتقال برتقال سويت كتير وحق عود الطالب شرب عصير البرتقال برتقال سويت كتير وحق البرتقال من غير إشكال يمس الحياة ويزيد الجمال يحرك الدم يروق البال يحرك الدم يروق البال البرتقال رخيص كتير كتير المية بقرشين.
Okay, that was in 1930s. Here we can see some images of the Lod airport in 1944, the Jerusalem airport, and the Jamal Pasha Theater in the city of Jaffa in 1937. Here you can see some pictures of the city of Haifa and the city of Nablus in 1930. Another photograph portraying the Palestinian Women Union in the city of Ramallah, the West Bank. And the second one on the very right is a picture portraying Berizet College, which was founded in 1924, and now it became a university. Several ancient pictures showcasing the rich history of the city of Gaza. A display of an American big car dealership in Jerusalem in the year 1934. And the other pictures are, no, the previous. And the other pictures are for the Palestinian passport at that time. And here you can see a snapshot of the Palestinian pound, the currency used during that period. Here there's a vintage television advertisement promoting a football match between the Palestinian national team and the Australian national team, and a picture from the 1939 match. Here you can see the Palestinian first radio channel, Huna al-Quds. Here is Jerusalem, the second oldest Arab radio station after Egypt, and it was founded on the 30th of March 1936. You can see here some pictures of the Church of Nativity during the Christmas time in 1934 and 1939. And here on the very right, the Christmas season when people are trying to enter the city of Bethlehem in the period 1890 until 1923. We should also acknowledge the Balfour Declaration, which is a letter sent by the British Foreign Secretary in 1917 to Lord Ritchell with the Zionist movement. This letter pledged the allocation of Palestinian land to non-Palestinians, triggering significant waves of immigration. Some people might recognize the Haganah, the name Haganah. Some people might know it, others might search it. It's very known in our history for some acts that they did at the very times when Israel was established. Of course, when people come in, people will leave. And this led us to the Nakba. The Palestinian Nakba is the Arabic word for the catastrophe. The catastrophe is the displacement of over 750,000 Palestinians during that period, the destruction of over 500 Palestinian villages, and the loss of thousands of innocent lives. The stark contrast between the past and present state of Palestine becomes evident. You can see Palestine in green under the British mandate on the very left. And then after the partition plan in 1947, the area in green became Palestine. After 1967, Palestine became in green. And in 2020, it shrank to what you can see on the very right. The picture on top is the picture taken in 1948 during the Nakba. And the one on the very bottom is taken today in Gaza. Now let's go to the talk. We have two pending cases at the International Court of Justice. The first one is focusing on the genocide taking place in Gaza, which visuals I will try not to display today. The second case is focusing on the Israeli occupation as a whole. With a close examination of the historical developments and Israel's attempt to displace and replace the indigenous population in Palestine, one might be able to acknowledge the nature of the Israeli occupation. On the other hand, images and video captures of the crimes committed against the Palestinians are typically living evidence on an ongoing genocide. Perhaps the claims of politicizing the International Court of Justice and make it crucial for us to remind everyone of the political nature of the Palestinian cause. But the question arises here: do we really need to politicize the courts or Human Rights Council? When the issue in matter is political by nature? The answer is clearly no. The pursuit of justice and securing the rights of the oppressed are fundamental roles of these organizations. At this juncture, one might wonder, should the Israeli occupation considered always above the law, committing heinous crimes without any accountability? Are those asking us and accusing us of politicizing the court, suggesting that the victim should die silently without even trying to seek justice at the court, so not to bother the oppressor? I'm someone who firmly believes in values, principles, ideals, and morals, and the value of every human being everywhere and anywhere. But I have never imagined that we would reach this point. In fact, Israel has established a new reality. And this reality states that there will be no red lines in any future conflict. This will have grave repercussions and consequences. And why I have to say this? Because after seeing the deliberate attack and killing of innocent people, children, women, elderly, the deliberate attack of churches and mosques, schools and hospitals, without accountability, This might encourage others in future conflicts to follow suit and to do the same. We find ourselves amid unmatched humanitarian crisis, witnessing horrifying scenes and tragic loss of innocent lives, and deliberate targeting of children before women and elderly. Yet, the biggest tragedy is the crisis in positions. Imagine that anyone today can witness massacres of populations by simply turning on the TV. Imagine that anyone today can see the killing of women, children, and elderly, the slaughtering, mass starvation, live broadcasted online. Can you imagine this? We reach this point. This is painful, but what's most agonizing is the reaction of the international community who failed to stop all this, and the reaction of the advocates of human rights, values, ideals who did nothing. Here, those who are expecting us to show our pain are wrong. And those who think that we are still expecting statements of condemnation, they are wrong again. Who wishes to act would have taken action already. And those who believe in values and morals do not really need a reminder. In conclusion, I have one message and a promise. Despite the profound pain and wounds that run deep, we are not shattered. Despair will not find a place among us, for our resilience remains unwavering. Reinforced, of course, by the support of our loyal friends and brothers. And our promise is firm. We shall rise, as we have always done. We shall continue in our staunch belief and dedication in our just cause and just struggle. And we pledge to achieve liberation of Palestine. And we all together going to celebrate on our national soil, in our eternal capital, Al-Quds, Jerusalem, this freedom. Long live Palestine, and long live those who support justice. عاشت فلسطين والمجد والخلود للشهداء.
A land without people, and people without a land. Thank you, Ambassador, for your remarks. You mentioned the new Israeli reality of having no red lines. I find that equally deeply troubling. But you mentioned a key word as well, which is accountability. And we're going to come back to that in a moment.
Nagyon szépen köszönjük, nagykövet úr, az elhangzott szavakat. Valóban nagyra becsüljük azt a mondatot, amelyet elmondott a nép föld nélkül és a föld nélküli nép. Azok, amiket elmondott, mindannyiunk számára megindítóak voltak, és a továbbiakban is majd még szeretnék ezekre reflektálni.
You know, as a fellow South African and as a graduate of international relations, over the years I've personally experienced the Palestine-Israel conflict as something that is very complex, very upsetting, but also something that felt very familiar, given the comparisons and similarities that apartheid South Africa experienced, the exposures that I've had, and the stories I grew up listening to.
Mint dél-afrikai honfitársa nagykövet úrnak, és mint a nemzetközi kapcsolatok szakon végzett diák, Az elmúlt évek során személyesen is megtapasztaltam a palesztin-izraeli konfliktust. Olyas valaminek láttam, ami nagyon komplex, nagyon fájdalmas, és amit nagyon ismerősnek is találtam, mivel nagyon sok hasonlóság tapasztalható mindazok között, ami Palesztinában történik, illetve az elmúlt évtizedek során az apartheid kapcsán tapasztaltunk Dél-Afrikában, mindaz, amit láttam, és mindaz a történet, amiket hallottam.
Given what we've heard and experienced over the past few months, I was actually proud to know that South Africa took such a leading role in geopolitics by taking these injustices to the International Criminal Court, which brings us to the topic of our next speaker, who will talk more about this.
Nagyon büszke vagyok arra, hogy Dél-Afrika ilyen vezető szerepet játszik a világban, kiáll az igazságtalansággal szemben, mindenféle politikai nyomás ellenére, és az ügyet egészen a Nemzetközi Bíróságig viszi, amely tulajdonképpen át is vezet bennünket ahhoz a témához, amelyről következő előadónk fog beszélni.
It is my honor to introduce you to a fellow compatriot and the ambassador of the Republic of South Africa, His Excellency Mr. Gangumzi Tsengiwe. Born and bred in South Africa during the height of the struggle during apartheid, his early political activism landed him in jail several times between 1984 and 1986.
Megtiszteltetés számomra, hogy bemutathatom önöknek honfitársamat, excellenciás Gangumzi Tsengiwe urat, Dél-Afrika magyarországi nagykövetét, aki Dél-Afrikában született, ott is nőtt fel, pontosan az apartheid legsúlyosabb időszaka alatt. Már korán politikai tevékenységet folytatott, aminek következtében jó néhányszor került börtönbe 1984 és 86 között.
Ambassador Ganga, as is also commonly known by, has also studied in South Africa as well as the UK, and he's been a diplomat for 16 years.
Nagykövet úr, Ganga, ahogy nálunk nevezik őt, Dél-Afrikában és az Egyesült Királyságban tanult, és az elmúlt 16 évben töltött be diplomáciai szolgálatot.
To talk about South Africa and the latest ICJ ruling, please join me in welcoming Ambassador Ganga.
Kérem, fogadják szeretettel, aki a Nemzetközi Bíróság határozatáról, illetve a genocidumról fog beszélni.
Program Director, Excellencies, members of the Diplomatic Corps, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I welcome and thank the opportunity to share with your esteemed audience the position of South Africa on the Israel-Palestine conflict, with specific reference to the International Court of Justice, ICJ. In addressing this important and weighty matter, I deemed it necessary to structure my input into three key areas. I will start by sketching the background to the role of South Africa, and this will be followed by a dissection of current interventions, focusing primarily on the ICJ. And the last part of my talk will attempt to synthesize some of the thoughts on the possible way forward. Since 1994, at the advent of our freedom and democracy in South Africa, our foreign policy position on Palestine has been consistent and has displayed systematic diplomatic support at bilateral, regional, and multilateral levels. Central to this has been what we regard in South Africa as a special obligation on our part to act both as a catalyst and amplifier for the Palestinian cause. It is also important to note that long before 1994, the liberation movements of both countries were unwavering in our commitment to work in collaboration with each other in pursuit of our struggle for freedom. However, some have raised the question, why South Africa? As I attempt to respond to this question, I am reminded of what our South African ambassador to the Kingdom of the Netherlands said in our submission during the ICJ hearing in the matter of the advisory opinion on Palestine. And I quote, "We as South Africans sense, see, hear, and feel to our core the inhumane, discriminatory policies and practices of the Israeli regime as an even more extreme form of the apartheid that was institutionalized against black people in our country, coincidentally from the year 1948, which lasted until 1994. And so, for us South Africans, the Palestinian narrative evokes experiences of our own anti-apartheid struggle against racial oppression. We experienced firsthand the effects of racial inequality and discrimination. And we remain very conscious of the long-term impact and consequences of all forms of discrimination. Distinguished guests, it is therefore not by accident that South Africa has been seized with the task of, among others, engaging multilateral instruments in solidarity and in support of Palestine. South Africa, along with many in the UN membership, have long accepted and supported a two-state solution, with Israel and Palestine living side by side in peace. The conduct of Israel as the occupying power is a flagrant violation of the United Nations General Assembly and the Security Council resolutions, and is in contravention of international law. It is therefore imperative that the international community take concrete steps against these illegal acts and go beyond mere condemnation. It is against this background that South Africa continues to seek ways of contributing to a lasting negotiated solution to the almost intractable conflict. The question therefore is, what are some of these interventions? Allow me to remind you that in November last year, South Africa, along with other states parties, and here we had countries like Venezuela, Bangladesh, Bolivia, and so on, we referred the situation in the state of Palestine to the Office of the Prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, ICC, pursuant to Article 14 of the Rome Statute. That investigation is ongoing. In this regard, South Africa is further encouraging other state parties to the Rome Statute to join the referral or to submit separate referrals independently. Ladies and gentlemen, the hostilities that occurred in the aftermath of October 7 and Israel's retaliation have been deemed one of the bloodiest escalations since May 2021. One of the unfortunate consequences of this is a false narrative that seeks to suggest that anything related to the Palestinian cause before October 7 should be ignored or should not be considered. To dispel this notion, the United Nations General Secretary, or Secretary General, condemned the attacks on civilians by both sides and asserted that the Hamas attack on 7th October did not happen in a vacuum, as the Palestinians have been subjected to 56 years of suffocating occupation. South Africa concurs with this assertion because, indeed, Israel's prolonged occupation is one of the root causes of instability in Israel and Palestine. Now, as part of our interventions, South Africa decided to institute legal proceedings at the International Court of Justice, ICJ, against Israel under the 1948 Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, Genocide Convention, with respect to the Israeli conduct in the present conflict in Gaza. Consequently, on the 29th of December last year, we filed our application to institute proceedings against Israel, as well as requested for provisional measures. Allow me to remind you that several countries made public statements in support of South Africa's contentious proceedings against Israel, and some states have indicated their desire to intervene in the proceedings after the hearing on provisional measures. Distinguished guests, in the interest of time, I will avoid delving deeply into the provisions of the Genocide Convention. Suffice it to say that South Africa has expressed in several multilateral fora, including at the 22nd session of the Assembly of States Parties to the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court and the United Nations General Assembly and the Security Council, that Israel's conduct against Palestinian people may amount to genocide. The prohibition of genocide and related acts is regarded as a peremptory norm of international law, which establishes obligations towards all states, whether or not they are parties to the Genocide Convention. Consequently, genocide is regarded as a crime, in relation to which all states have an interest. Importantly, by instituting these proceedings before the ICJ, South Africa was acting in accordance with its obligations contained in Article 1 of the Convention by taking a positive step to prevent genocide. It is now a historical fact that the court held oral hearings on the provisional measures requested by South Africa, and in our submission, we argued that Israel has committed acts which show a systematic pattern of conduct from which genocide can be inferred, amounting to a transgression of Article 2 of the Genocide Convention. In this regard, various examples to demonstrate this allegation were presented to the court. It was also emphasized that at the provisional measures phase of the proceedings, the court is not required to make a determination on whether Israel has indeed committed acts of genocide. Rather, the court is only required to assess whether a finding that Israel has committed acts of genocide is plausible. Evidence was presented to support the conclusion of genocidal intent on the part of Israeli authorities. The court delivered its order on South Africa's request for provisional measures on the 26th of January this year. Whilst not all provisional measures requested by South Africa were granted, there are crucial ones that were granted by the ICJ. The court was near unanimous, almost 15-2, if you look at the panel of judges that presided over this case, in the order for provisional measures, which include that Israel shall take all measures within its power to prevent all acts of genocide as contained in Article 2 of the Genocide Convention. Israel is furthermore required to take effective measures to provide urgently needed basic services and humanitarian assistance. It must ensure effective measures are taken to prevent the destruction of evidence and ensure its preservation. Distinguished guests, it should also be noted that the court deemed it necessary to emphasize that all parties to the conflict in the Gaza Strip are bound by international humanitarian law. That it is gravely concerned, the court that is, about the fate of the hostages abducted during the attack in Israel on 7 October and held since then by Hamas, and therefore calls for their immediate and unconditional release. Importantly, Israel was required to provide a report to the court on the measures it has taken to give effect to these measures within 1 month, which they did. In this regard, South Africa is considering the contents of this report, analyzing its veracity in the context of what is happening on the ground, and will, within stipulated timeframes, provide the court with its comments. Related, but independent of the aforementioned contentious proceedings, the United Nations General Assembly requested the International Court of Justice to render an advisory opinion on the legal consequences arising from the policies and practices of Israel in the occupied Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem. During the hearings on this matter, the State of Palestine, 45 member states of the United Nations, including South Africa, and 3 international organizations, namely the League of Arab States, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, and the African Union, presented oral statements to the court. And by far, the majority of these entities spoke in favor of Palestinians' right to self-determination. Ladies and gentlemen, as I conclude with some thoughts on the way forward, South Africa is of the view that the decision by the ICJ on the Genocide Convention case marks a decisive victory for the international rule of law and represents a significant milestone in the search for justice for the Palestinian people. It also affirms the importance of global governance institutions, including the organs of the UN. It remains vital, therefore, for all member states to respect and implement the decisions of the court. The finding also makes it clear that there is a serious risk of genocide against the Palestinian people in Gaza. Our plea as South Africa is that third states must therefore also act independently and intervene to prevent genocide by Israel and to ensure that they are not themselves in violation of the Genocide Convention. And this is critical, including by aiding or assisting in the commission of genocide. This necessarily imposes an obligation on all states to cease activities which are plausibly genocidal. There is no credible basis for Israel to continue to claim that its actions are in full compliance with international law, having regard to the ICJ ruling. South Africa had hoped that Israel will not act to frustrate the application of this court order. However, we now know that Israel is still on the same destructive trajectory as before the order of the court. In fact, Israel Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has rejected this order. But this is not surprising. We had the same with apartheid South Africa. When there were international rulings by the United Nations bodies, the apartheid state would not play ball. So, we are seeing very similar conduct and approach between the apartheid state and the Israeli government. The recent massacre and the latest intensity of terror and atrocities visited upon Palestinians by the Israeli government constitute continued breach of international law and are in breach of the binding provisional orders of the ICJ. It is in this context that on the 12th of February this year, South Africa made an urgent request to the ICJ to consider whether the decision announced by Israel to extend its military operations in Rafah, which is the last refuge for the surviving people in Gaza, requires that the court uses its power to prevent further imminent breach of the rights of Palestinians in Gaza. We now know that in its ruling on this urgent matter, the court noted that the perilous situation demands immediate and effective implementation of the provisional measures indicated by the court earlier, which are applicable throughout the Gaza Strip. Distinguished guests, South Africa will endeavor to act within the institutions of global governance to protect the rights, including the fundamental right to life of Palestinians in Gaza. Having said this, it is important to note that legal remedies are one route to end institutionalized impunity that Israel has enjoyed for decades, which has even emboldened them to act in the manner they have been doing. However, we are conscious of the fact that legal remedies on their own are not sufficient, and the international community must consider other measures to end the unlawful actions of the Israeli government. A first step is an unconditional call for a ceasefire by the United Nations Security Council. An immediate and unconditional call for a ceasefire is now a moral and life-saving necessity. It is also critical that efforts aimed at ending this carnage must be supported, including the mediation process facilitated by, among others, Qatar and Egypt. Ladies and gentlemen, South Africa will continue to work with the Palestinian people towards the realization of their collective right to self-determination. For, as Nelson Mandela momentously declared, our freedom is incomplete without the freedom of the Palestinians. I thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Ganga, for those remarks and for reminding us about the consistent foreign policy position that South Africa has towards the state of Palestine, for reminding us of the nuances in the ICJ ruling when you refer to plausibility and the fact that there is indeed a serious risk that genocide is happening. Thank you.
Nagyon szépen köszönjük, nagykövet úr, az elmondottakat. Köszönjük azt, hogy ismertette velünk részletesen a Nemzetközi Bíróság határozatát, illetve annak következményeit, és hogy figyelmeztetett bennünket arra, hogy mennyire fontos a továbbiakban is egymás vált válva vetve együtt küzdeni Palesztina érdekeiért és szabadságáért.
Earlier on, I spoke about the serious consequences that can emerge from failures in diplomacy. Ambassador Ganga elaborated on the shortfalls of legal remedies to try and find a solution. And our next speaker is in a perfect position to talk to this very point, having just returned to Budapest a few days ago following an influential role as a coordinator of the Antalya Diplomacy Forum.
Korábban már említettem azokat a komoly következményeket, amelyeket a a súlyos diplomáciai hibák eredményezhetnek. Következő előadónk kiváló helyzetben van ahhoz, hogy erről a kérdésről szóljon, hiszen épp most ért vissza Budapestre néhány nappal ezelőtt az Antáliai Diplomáciai Fórumról, ahol koordinátori szerepet vállal.
The Antalya Diplomacy Forum is an initiative of the Turkish Foreign Ministry. I believe it was quite a success, and this year it explored the theme Advancing Diplomacy in Terms of Turmoil, which, among others, had a panel discussion that delved into this specific decades-long conflict to highlight the need for a shift towards peace through legal and diplomatic channels.
Az Antáliai Diplomáciai Fórum a török külügyminisztérium egyik kezdeményezése, mégpedig egy nagyon sikeres kezdeményezése. Az idei évben a témájuk a nehéz időkben a diplomáciai szerepvállalás volt a témájuk, és ez többek között panelbeszélgetések formájában is zajlott, és ezek során megemlítették az évtizedes izraeli-palesztin konfliktust, és arról is szó volt, hogy mennyire fontos az, hogy végre elinduljanak a béke irányába, mégpedig jogi és diplomáciai csatornák segítségével.
It is my privilege to welcome Her Excellency Ms. Gulshan Karanas Ekshigulu, the Ambassador of the Republic of Turkey to Hungary. Ambassador Gulshan has been recognized as a young global leader for her commitment to international cooperation and peace.
Most pedig megtiszteltetés számomra, hogy üdvözölhetem és felkérhetem ő excellenciája Gülsen Karanis Ekshigulu asszony, a Török Köztársaság magyarországi nagykövetét, hogy elmondja beszédét. Nagykövet asszony a fiatal globális vezető elismerést kapta, elkötelezettsége miatt, melyet a nemzetközi együttműködés és a béke irányába mutat.
Today she brings her insightful perspectives on the Turkish view on the Israel-Palestine conflict and the humanitarian tragedy, informed not only by her extensive diplomatic experience, but also her recent involvement in the Antalya Diplomacy Forum discussions.
A mai napon betekintést nyújt számunkra a török nézeteket illetően, melyek az izraeli-palesztin konfliktus kapcsán keletkeztek, illetve hogy látja a Törökország a humanitárius tragédiát, és ezt nem csupán kiterjedt diplomáciai tapasztalataira alapítva mondja el nekünk, hanem az előbb említett Antáliai Diplomáciai Fórumon zajlott beszélgetések alapján is.
Please join me in welcoming Her Excellency Ms. Gulshan Karanas Ekshigulu.
Distinguished guests, dear friends, it's a privilege to join my esteemed colleagues and also brothers, Ambassador Al-Husseini and Ambassador Zengive today, on this important occasion where we discuss the deafening silence and inaction of the international community in view of the unfolding humanitarian tragedy in Gaza. I wish the tragedy in Gaza had never happened and we were not gathered to talk about it today. Yet, here we are to address the burning injustice in Palestine, which had been at the heart of almost all problems in the Middle East. I still remember the opening line of many historic accounts on the Middle East from my student years. The Israel-Palestine conflict is part and parcel of the complex issues in the region. Yet, the international community has failed to address this issue, and with recent developments, it has reached to a point where it can no longer be ignored. Turkey strongly and clearly rejects and condemns all attacks against civilians. The violence should stop immediately, and civilians must be protected at all times and under any circumstances. The scope of the Israel-Palestinian conflict is surely wide, ranging from settlements to transfer of Israeli settlers to the occupied territories, confiscations of land, demolition of homes, and displacement of Palestinian civilians in violation of international law. The issue has always been at the top of the agenda of both at United Nations General Assembly and the Security Council, almost since the foundation of the United Nations. But today, I will try to touch upon the recent and extraordinarily dangerous situation in the Gaza Strip and how Turkey approaches to the developments. First of all, I would like to begin with the fact that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict did not start on October 7, 2023. It is not about a certain Palestinian faction or group either. However, the unfolding situation has just proved once again that without addressing the root cause, the issue cannot be settled. Denying the existence and rights of the Palestinians, applying violence and oppression has not brought peace, and it will not bring peace to the region. Palestinians have been seeking recognition of their rights in their own land. They only want justice, equality, dignity, and their long-deserved independence. In fact, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict could have been settled by now if the international law, especially humanitarian law and human rights law, had been upheld and inalienable rights of the Palestinian people had been recognized. We believe that a lasting peace can be possible through the establishment of an independent and sovereign Palestinian state with East Jerusalem as its capital, based on the 1967 borders. It will be the most reasonable and permanent solution, and Turkey is committed to make every contribution and effort toward this goal. Yet, Israel's unilateral practices that are considered null and void in many of the United Nations resolutions are continuously putting the two-state vision in jeopardy. The recent attacks directed against Palestine has been a great cause of concern. Unfortunately, these attacks have been going on since 5 months, 152 days. As a matter of fact, humanity stands at a crossroads in Gaza now, more than ever. And Turkey is not only defending its Palestinian brothers and sisters, but also defending human rights, peace, and international law. We underline in every occasion that ongoing attacks will exacerbate the humanitarian tragedy in Gaza and undermine the efforts to secure a lasting ceasefire in the region. Palestinian people have been living in extremely difficult conditions under Israel's control. Decades-long occupation policies have not only led to deprivation of Palestinian people of their fundamental rights, but also made them dependent on Israel's mercy. Unfortunately, the towering figures from the site are heartbreaking. Since October, more than 30,000 Palestinians have been killed in Gaza, and around 70% of the casualties are women and children. Around 2 million Palestinians have been forced to displace, and people across Gaza are drastically facing with diminished supplies of basic needs to survive, such as water, food, medicine, fuel, and electricity. Hospitals, refugee camps, schools, places of worship, churches, and mosques have been targeted unsparingly. Today, 1 in 6 children in northern Gaza is estimated to be severely malnourished. Yet, despite these dire conditions, some countries have suspended their funding to United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine refugees in the Near East, upon allegations about a few UNRWA workers. UNRWA is among the leading organizations to assist the Palestinian refugees. As the news suggests, the last UNRWA food convoy into northern Gaza was over a month ago, the ongoing attacks and the paralyzation of humanitarian aid are worsening the catastrophe and severely affect the civilian population. Last week, we got shocked with the recent attack against civilians in the Nabulsi Square who were waiting for humanitarian aid. It was yet another crime committed against humanity and another warning that the entire world must realize that the atrocity in Gaza is about to become a global catastrophe. Israel's aggression on the southern city of Rafah is also a cause for grave concern. The escalating attacks on Rafah would cause another step to expel the people of Gaza from their own land. Any plan for forced displacement of Palestinian people is unacceptable. The responsibility and accountability for remaining silent in the face of these acts tantamount to genocide will be immense. Humanitarian and enterprising nature of Turkish foreign policy is driven by the moral values. Humanity and morality have always been our compass. Therefore, we raise our voice in the face of the atrocities committed in Gaza, like we did elsewhere worldwide from a humanitarian perspective. Make no mistake, we have no problem with the Jewish community itself. Turkey has strong and profound bonds with all people in the region, not only with the Arabs, but also with the Jews. Jewish people who were fleeing Spanish Inquisition centuries ago found shelter in Turkey, where they were welcomed. The same happened during the Second World War, where we did not hesitate extending protection to the Jewish community, regardless of their citizenship in the face of the Holocaust. We have never hesitated to stand with the oppressed, regardless of their background, religion, or identity. As such, we cannot remain indifferent to the ongoing attacks by Israel against the Palestinian people. Another important aspect of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is about observing the sanctity of and historical status quo of the holy places. Located in East Jerusalem, the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound, or Haram al-Sharif, is among the holiest sites for Muslims around the world. In addition to the holy places, the status of Jerusalem itself also is a main issue. The protection of the status of Jerusalem and the holy sites is important not only for the maintenance of the peaceful coexistence among people of different faiths since the Ottoman era, but also for observing the sensitivities of billions of people around the world. Deepening and prolongation of Israel's attack will surely have negative regional and global consequences as well. The growing threat of expansion of the conflict from Lebanon to Syria, Iraq, and Yemen is also formidable. Either a war will spread to the world or a great peace will emerge. Our preference is for peace, as it always has been so. In the face of the developments, the real obstacle to peace appears obvious: the deepening occupation by Israel of the Palestinian territories, including East Jerusalem, and failure to implement the two-state vision, Israel and Palestine living side by side. For many years, we have seen that there were condemnations, and waiting for others to solve the problems did not lead to peace. But this time, we took the matters into our own hands and displayed an act of regional ownership. The contact group on Gaza, mandated by the Joint Organization of Islamic Cooperation and the Arab League Summit, is established to intervene in the ongoing tragedy in Palestine with this view. The members are Turkey, Palestine, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Indonesia, Qatar, and Nigeria. This group is unique since it manifests the solidarity of the Muslim world with the Palestinians and to raise international public awareness regarding the tragedy in Gaza. Putting an end to violence in Gaza was also a primary topic at the Antalya Diplomacy Forum last weekend, as you mentioned, where nearly 5,000 people from 148 countries participated. The forum had the theme entitled Advancing Diplomacy in Times of Turmoil, where our President Recep Tayyip Erdogan and our First Lady Emine Erdogan and also our Foreign Minister Fidan addressed the crisis and reiterated the immediate need to ensure global peace. A special panel session was held on the contact group on Gaza as well, with the participation of foreign ministers of Palestine and Egypt, alongside with Turkish Foreign Minister Fidan. And yesterday, President Abbas was in Ankara yesterday, had a meeting with our president, and our Foreign Minister Fidan was in Jeddah for the extraordinary session of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation for this subject. At this point, let me also elaborate on the guarantorship model that we have envisaged. Turkey is ready to contribute efforts to the settlement of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in any possible way. This is why, drawing lessons from past experiences, we propose a guarantorship mechanism to facilitate the peace process and make the final agreement permanent. It has now become a strategic imperative that the countries in the region bear the brunt of the conflict, and hence they may become a partner of the solution. The Turkish guarantorship mechanism has precisely this aim. Initially, the conflicting parties should reach an agreement to activate this mechanism with the responsibility to ensure its implementation. Second, there could be multiple guarantors. One guarantor could only operate in Palestine, whereas others operate vis-à-vis Israel. The guarantors on the Palestinian side could be drawn from the region, and Turkey is ready to play a role in this regard. Our proposal also underlines that the guarantors should pave the way for a two-state solution, since there cannot be a sustainable peace in the region without an independent and sovereign Palestinian state. This is one of the visionary proposals for sustainable peace in the region, and we believe that if the international community wishes to sincerely contribute to peace and stability, there is always a way to do that. Turkish proposal for a guarantorship model is one of these ways. Before I conclude, allow me to comment on the process started by South Africa before the International Court of Justice concerning the violations by Israel of its obligations under 1948 Genocide Convention. The case is one of its kind, as more than 50 countries have been presenting arguments. As such, it has the largest number of parties to participate in a single case since the court was established in 1945. We welcome the application filed by South Africa. It is indeed a timely attempt to protect the Palestinian people against further and severe harm. We must hold accountable before the law those responsible for the attacks on civilians. The ICJ's order on the provisional measures is a positive development in the face of the gravity of the humanitarian disaster in Gaza. Yet, we could have preferred the order encompass a broader content. Considering its binding nature, it is our expectation for Israel to implement the provisional measures ordered by the ICJ fully and without delay. Turkey has submitted its written views regarding these proceedings, and our Deputy Foreign Minister, Ambassador Yildiz, also delivered an oral statement before the court. The ICJ process has the opportunity to provide a legal contribution to the long overdue solution of the conflict. We sincerely hope that the court will take this chance offered by both legal proceedings and render its judgment in the right direction under international law. Ladies and gentlemen, the key issue remains to be how to end the bloodshed in Gaza and seek a just and lasting solution. Efforts towards a fair and lasting solution should stick to the established parameters regarding the Israeli-Palestinian question, namely the two-state solution. Turkey will continue its efforts for a lasting ceasefire, unhindered and scaled-up humanitarian access to Gaza, and enduring peace. The respect to the historical status quo in the holy places in Jerusalem is even more important as we approach the holy month of Ramadan. Finally, I would like to thank the distinguished Embassy of Palestine and the Embassy of South Africa for their cooperation in organizing this seminar, as well as Yunus Emre Cultural Center for hosting us, and thank you again for your attention.
Thank you, Ambassador Gulshan, for sharing your vision for Turkey towards a path towards peace and stability, more specifically on the proposal for the two-state solution and the guarantorship model. Besides that, we heard early on about Gaza and the latest developments in that regard. We also touched on the ICJ ruling. But before we move towards a close, I think it's important to open up to the audience for any questions or comments that any of you may have. If you do decide to comment, we would ask you to please just keep it short. I'm conscious of time, but we will try to get to as many as possible until the break. Is there any comments or questions from the members of the audience?
Hello, my name is Rafael Schröder. I'm from the Belgian Embassy in Budapest. Thank you very much for organizing this event. Very brief question. Do you have any comments on the Hungarian government's position on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict? Thank you.
All of us?
Yes.
Or?
If new evidence comes to light in regards to the current case submitted to the ICJ, how will this evidence be presented to the court?
Regarding the first question, so I will just start and will give the mic to my colleagues. We are asked the question in a couple of platforms because the views are different to this conflict, and I always comment and give the answer like this. First of all, we enjoy the political cooperation at every level with Hungary. As you know, in the last December, when we had the High-Level Strategic Cooperation Council meeting, we even upgraded our relations to the enhanced strategic partnership with Hungary. And we call Hungary and Hungarians as the distant relative, close neighbor, despite we don't share a common border, an eternal partner. But it doesn't mean that we always see eye to eye on every issue, and this is one of them. And we always, of course, just raise the issue in our views at every level. But that doesn't mean we always have the same perspective at every issue. So just give the mic to you.
Thank you very much. The question was, how do we deal with new evidence with respect to the ICJ process? A very short response to that is that you must remember that there are two processes currently unfolding. One is with the International Criminal Court, ICC. And this is the one that is looking at the referral by the United Nations General Assembly on the ICJ is the United Nations General Assembly, and the second one is the one referred to ICJ by South Africa. Where we are currently is that Israel, as part of the provisional measures, was expected to report to the ICJ on the extent to which they've been able to comply with the court order. That report has been submitted to the ICJ. In turn, South Africa is now required to comment on the report by Israel. Now, comments by South Africa will take into account what is currently unfolding on the ground. So if there's new evidence emerging about further atrocities, that evidence will form part of our presentation to the ICJ. With respect to the advisory opinion referred to the ICJ by the United Nations General Assembly, countries at any point in time, and this is the call that we are making, can on their own independently submit or make submissions to the ICJ about what they regard as criminal acts committed by Israel. So the process is a very long one, especially the one on the Genocide Convention. Remember now, we're just dealing with provisional measures. So it is anticipated that the merits of the case will actually be dealt with going forward. And so that leaves space for new evidence to be brought into the picture. Thank you.
I think Ambassador Venezuela requested a 2-minute comment.
Un permiso para permission for the lead test. Very short. First of all, I would like to send the realization of this event, and especially its organizers, the colleagues from Palestina, South Africa, and Turkey. They may same country stand out by allowing us to listen to their denouncement and their urging for peace in Palestine in the case of genocide committed against the nation by international Zionists and the state of Israel. In Venezuela, our President Nicolás Maduro Moros, and before him our beloved President Hugo Chávez Frías, outlined a clear and firm foreign policy of support to the Palestinian cause, but without words and our action. My country cut the diplomatic ties with Israel in January 15, 2009, precisely because of the systematic aggression against the Palestinian people through bloodless violation of the most elementary human right, as well as the violence and illegal occupation of Arab territories. My country maintains historic, diplomatic, and cooperative relations with the Palestinian nation. And we add our voice for them to become a state with control over their territories. At the International Court of Justice, we add our action of support to the courage and just initiative of South Africa, and we demand that international bodies act immediately to achieve the ceasefire and peace. What is happening in Gaza offends humanity, and more government and organizations are joining in to advance on the road to peace. Palestina can count on Venezuela and its President Nicolás Maduro. Long live free Palestine. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Is there any final question?
I'd like to make a comment on this. Ladies and gentlemen, Your Excellencies, here we are representing the Hungarian party, our homeland movement here. Hearing of what is happening in Gaza and seeing your presentations and knowing reality, it is really heartbreaking. And the question arises, how is it that the international community, most of the international community is silent? Most of the governments and a lot of political parties are silent. And I'd like to tell you the answer without political correctness. A lot of governments, a lot of political forces are the puppet of Israel. This is the answer. And if they are not, they are afraid that they will get a slap from Israel if they say anything about this case. But we are not afraid. We are not afraid. Our homeland party is not afraid to say, and we share the opinion and absolutely support Turkey's opinion and position on this respect. And I will be very short, I don't want to repeat what we've heard. The solution is immediate ceasefire, and Israel must return to the negotiating table. This is our position. Thank you.
Thank you for the question, and thank you for your attention at this event as we conclude. Once again, to our distinguished speakers, thank you for taking the time. And please, I invite you to the cafeteria for some light snacks and drinks, and you are more than welcome to remain for the film screening titled 5 Broken Cameras. Thank you, and good evening.